Hey everybody, welcome to my basement workshop. Those of you who are regular viewers of my channel may recall in a odds and sods episode a little while back where I kind of went over a few different tools I picked from here and there. I had picked up this Hamilton indicator, and this is a model 419-005 by the looks of it. Interesting things about this indicator are, first off, it's got a rather large face on it. I believe it's a 3-inch dial, which is not typical. I'm sorry, 3.5-inch dial, which is not typical of many indicators. The other interesting fact about it is that the resolution of the indicator, each division is 0.00005 thousandths. Half a 100,000th of an inch per division. That's like pretty nuts, you know. So anyways, as indicators go. So I've got a fond place in my heart for old and unusual indicators, and this caught my eye, and it was in the $6 bin because it's broken. And it's got some rust spotting on the outer rim here. I cleaned this up some, but it still looks really dingy, and it almost looks to me as if a lot of that dinginess that I'm seeing in there is actually on the back side of this crystal. Call it a crystal, but it's really plastic. So I think if I clean the back side of this, it'll be an improvement, and maybe I'll even invest in a brand new one for it if we can repair it. So what's wrong with it is it doesn't move at all. It does absolutely nothing. There's a knob on the side here that doesn't seem to be doing anything. I did take a quick look inside and was able to determine that the reason why it's not working has nothing to do with this knob, and was also able to determine that it appears to just be really stuck. So I was able to move the arm that this comes in contact with manually and get the needle to move, so that's a good sign. But it just doesn't want to return on its own. And there didn't seem to be any way to really get to the parts to clean them from inside here, and I certainly didn't want to just go spraying stuff inside here because it would just leak through and come out on the face. So it appeared to me that the way to properly disassemble this for cleaning would be to actually remove the front face. To remove the front face, I needed to remove the indicator and the pointer, and I did not have any tools to do that. I have purchased a El Cheapo made in India hand removal tool for watches, and my hope is that I will be able to use this, if you can see that action there, how that works, to pull this hand off without destroying this thing. So for starters, I need to get this off, and I believe this is called the bezel. And it's also pretty sure should be able to turn, and it doesn't, so that you can dial this around to 0 no matter where the pointer is. You can 0 it, and it's not turning at all. And that might just be that these screws are too tight, or it could also be that it's just very, very stuck. Maybe there's even some rust underneath here. So I'm just going to start by loosening the 3 screws a little bit and just see if that lets me turn this. There we go. That's already starting to turn. There we go. So that's what's going on there. It's probably just rust in the groove. So now that I know that that's what's going on as far as why it's not turning, I'm going to now back these screws out pretty far. Not all the way. I don't think I need to take them all the way out. If I take them all the way out, then that's just 3 tiny screws I got to deal with being worried about losing. Whereas if I leave them in... Oh, that one fell out. That's interesting. That is almost look like the face wants to come with this. There we go. Okay, great. So I can definitely see that on the back side here. There is some stuff that looks like it might clean up. So we can improve how this looks, but it's still going to be yellowed. Also, I could see that there's actually, I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's actually dirt on the face of the dial itself. So I should be able to clean that. Obviously, I want to clean that very carefully because I don't want to damage, because this feels like it might just be paper, unfortunately. I think that's just a very thin sheet of aluminum, and I think they just stick a paper to it. So, alright. Now the moment of truth. Will my little wonderful cheapo tool pay for itself? Let me get my magnifying light over here a little bit closer. It worked. And I want to be careful that I don't bend that, so I'm going to put that off to the side so it's safe. It's shiny on the edge like it's aluminum. I think that's what it is. I think it's aluminum. A little bit of dirt there. So this is like a little star washer. It's got a cup shape to it, slightly cupped, and the concave side is facing up. Alright, so now we take these 4 screws out. I believe we will see the belly of the beast. Now I don't know whether or not this has to go on a specific way. These screw holes look like they're equidistant, so that means I could rotate it 90 degrees. And again, 90 degrees, so I don't know if I should make a mark indicating. No, I don't see anything to indicate that that has to go on a certain way. I think that can go on either like that or so on, so I'm not going to worry about that. Alright, so here we are. It's interesting, I could see actually less of this mechanism from this side than I could from the other side. So the whole movement, so to speak, right here in the middle, actually sits on a bracket that is held in place to the body of the indicator by a couple of screws that go in right here through the side. So it's quite, since this moves freely, this isn't what's sticking. The post is not sticking. It's quite possible I might be able to actually remove this whole movement from the body just by taking those 2 screws out. There's also, well, there's 2 screws here that hold. Well, it looks like they might hold actually this movement to that bracket, so I might even be able to leave that bracket behind. This is interesting to me. This says Japan right here. I thought the Hamilton Watch Company was an American company. Huh. Alright, so I'm on the Hamilton Watch Company's website, and they have a history page. I also got some information off of Wikipedia. I was probably mistaking Hamilton for Waltham. The Waltham Watch Company is in Massachusetts. The Hamilton Watch Company was founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1892. It's funny, the Hamilton's history page on the company website, it doesn't mention anything about sale until 1974. talks about the company being sold to the Swatch Group. But I should say it doesn't mention anything about where the watches were produced. You know, it says that the company was founded in Pennsylvania and then doesn't really talk about anything as far as overseas manufacturer. But I think that the, let's see, Hamilton transferred both our headquarters and production facilities to the heart of watchmaking in Biel, Switzerland. That was in 2003. So they don't really talk about U.S. production or indicators at all. Where the Wikipedia page says that the Hamilton Watch Company went on to manufacture and market pocket watches and wristwatches, ending American manufacture in 1969. Through a series of mergers and acquisitions, the Hamilton Watch Company became a diversified conglomerate itself and was subsequently integrated into the Swatch Group. Here's a little blurb on the Practical Machinist website forum. Somebody did a post called Hamilton Dial Indicator. They said that they went to an auction and saw a Hamilton dial indicator, and the guy who outbid him on it, he got to talking to the guy, and the guy said he had never seen one before. But then this guy found some information, and apparently in 1975, Dorsey, that's D-O-R-S-E-Y, purchased the instrument division of the Hamilton Watch Company of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This acquisition added the well-known and respected Hamilton DATCON indicator instruments, dial indicator instruments, to the company's products. During 1976, Dorsey relocated to the 35,000 square foot building at 253 Mansion Street in the city of Poughkeepsie, New York. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to go to this thread in a second, see what that says. But I've heard of DATCON and Dorsey. I have some indicators by them, so manufactured by them. So now that's starting to make sense. They basically continued to market indicators underneath that name, the Hamilton Watch Company name, but that it was already probably sold to this DATCON or Dorsey. Oh, and that link takes you to a page that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe they relocated it because it is the Dorsey company. Well, I wasn't able to find anything else that would explain why this says Japan on it. Could just be that they just had this part made in Japan, and maybe they still made the movement in New York. I'll tell you what, the construction of this thing is pretty beefy. Back cover, solid metal, pretty thick. This frame is machined out of looks like this has been machined out of a solid piece of metal. Alright, so I took the back off now because you can see the shape of this piece right here. Because of the shape of this piece right here, it seems to me like I should be able to take these two screws out from the other side, and that whole movement should just come right out the front. But just to show you what I had already figured out was that if you push up on this, it actually does move. From this side you can probably see it better. See, that's moving. So I don't know if any of these numbers would mean anything to anybody. First I thought maybe that was a date code, a date, but that doesn't make sense because it's 4/9/2/91. So my thinking is I might be able to just clean this. Okay guys, if I were a professional indicator or watch repair person, what I would probably do at this point is I would probably take these 3 screws out, which would allow this plate to come off and expose all of the pivot points, which I could see 2 major ones. Well, 3 actually. There's, I believe, 1 right in the middle there. But there's a jewel right here, okay? And then there's a jewel right here. So you've heard of so many jewel movements, and generally in the old days the rule of thumb was the more jewels in the movement, the finer the movement. And what they're referring to is a I believe it's a ruby gemstone material that is actually used to make the bearing for the pivot points in the mechanism. I don't know how good that's coming out, but you can actually see a little bit of red right there. And that's one of those little jewels. So, you're probably saying to yourself, well, why don't you do that, Steve? Well, I'll tell you why. You know, Inspector Harry Callahan in the movie Magnum Force had a great quote. I believe it was something like, "A man's got to know his limitations." So anyways, I know that what's going to happen if I take these 3 screws off, because, you know, it's me we're talking about here. My luck's just not going to be that good. Something's going to fall out of position. More to the point, I think what'll happen is, more than likely, this spring, this little tiny hair spring that's in there, it's a little spirally spring down inside there. All right. That probably gets preloaded. So in other words, it's going to be turned and have a little bit of tension on it before this is reassembled the way that it is. And I got a feeling that I would have trouble doing that. I suspect that the way you're supposed to do it may very well be, I think that one end of that little spring is possibly right there. It's actually sticking in a hole on this disc. And I think that these 2 screws right here, you can see if I loosen these 2 screws, that would allow this disc to be rotated. And I think that that might very well be how you preset the preload on that spring, on that little cluck spring. That's I think the word I was looking for, cluck spring. So, and maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. Maybe that's all that is responsible for making this go back is the clock spring, because I don't see any other springs in this mechanism. But I think rather than venture with adjusting something I'm not positive about, or taking something apart and having it fall apart, I think I'm just going to try and clean this with a zero residue solvent. I mean, all the parts in here except for the gems are probably impervious to a mild solvent. Okay, I just cleaned that movement. I forgot to hit the record button, but basically I used a product called CRC 2-26 Multi-Purpose Precision Lubricant. It's a cleaner lubricant for, well, for electronics, really. I hemmed and hawed over what I wanted to use. I think that's going to be okay. So I basically sprayed it and let it drip, and cleaned off the really, blew off the excess, and the movement freed right up. Just grab it off to the side here and show you. So now it's completely free. Seems to be working perfectly. In the meantime, I decided I'm going to clean this face, so I just am using a mild detergent. I'm using LA's Totally Awesome Degreaser, and I've got a clean shop towel here, and you can see I just wiped some of it. You can see how much dirt is coming off of that face. That is not the lettering that's coming off, in case you're wondering. That's actually dirt. Obviously I'm trying to strike a balance between being aggressive enough to try and scrub off some of this dirt while at the same time not run the risk of damaging the lettering or the numbers. So now I'm going to grab another clean towel and, oop, was out of frame again. Grab another clean towel and do it again, but that's already an improvement. Alright, I think for this final go around I'll use a lint-free wipe. There's still a lot of garbage on there. Not bad. That's a big improvement. Now let's see what we can do to this crystal. Alright, that's going to be an improvement. And again, if I wanted to, I could buy a new crystal for this thing. But I don't have a crystal press. So the other thing I could do is I could just send this out to MR Tool Repair and have him put one in. And then I could just reinstall this when it comes back. But the reality is, this whole indicator is just going to probably go sit in my drawer and not actually do much in its life. Alright, let's do some reassembly. Alright guys, so here's the only problem with unscrewing this bracket the way that I did. The screw holes in the bracket are larger. That allows for a little bit of adjustment. So I have to make sure I've got this alignment right. And you can actually see right there that this, the top of this piece of this frame right here, that contact point is not lining up with that, because this actually has to come over a little bit like this. See how I'm moving that over right now? I'm going to see what I can do to try and get this alignment back as close to the way it was as possible. Alright, and again, I don't think there was any particular way that this cover had to be oriented, so this was very careful to make sure that in case that post sticks up, that I don't damage that. Next up, this little cup-shaped copper washer goes on with the cup facing up. It's actually also got a little area that sticks down on the bottom there that fits right in that enlarged hole. The face goes on next. Probably doesn't matter which way this goes on because it's going to turn with the bezel. Now the tricky part is I've got to get the hand back on. Now I noticed when I took this apart that the hand was pointing right straight down at where the stem is. So that's how I'm going to orient it when I put it back on. Hopefully that's going to work out okay. Oddly enough, it almost seems like it shouldn't be there. Well, I'm just thinking about it. I'm thinking how the zero's up at the top. Of course, you probably want to preload this a little bit when you're taking a measurement. So that's going to kick the needle up. I wonder if it kicks it up to half revolution or not. Well, we'll go with that and see what happens. Now, I don't have a proper press to put this back on. A lot of the cheap ones that are online for doing this kind of work are for watches. So the problem is that the press is so small that a large indicator like this would actually hit the throat of the press if you tried to put it in a position. So I'm wondering if I could just use this to hold this and push it back on. easily get into trouble with this and end up bending that central post. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, this is definitely the hardest part of this whole repair, is getting this hand back on to the little tiny shaft. The shaft is really, really short, and it's recessed way down in there. So it's very difficult to try and get this on. You know, my fear is, I'm worried that like I'm not going to be on it correctly, and I'm going to push force down on it and bend something. And to make matters worse, it's pretty difficult to hold this hand. So now I'm using the hand removal tool. I've just kind of got a little mock-up here where I put a small cant twist clamp on here, and that's squeezing these fingers. And I could still see that, you know, it's not lined up correctly. So, let's see if I can get this just right. See, I keep thinking I'm going to squeeze the outside here, but if I squeeze the outside here, that extends the two Teflon legs that actually push on the face to pull the hands off. Alright, so I'm pretty sure I've got it set on there, but I just barely have it on there, and I didn't want to use that tool to try and push down. I wanted to try and push that on very straight, so I've got this little press that I picked up a while back. It's actually for electronic work. It's for crimping ribbon cable type of connectors on computers and stuff. So the problem is that its maximum travel doesn't quite reach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a dowel pin. I'm going to hold a dowel pin on top of there and see if this will work. Alright. I think that's it. That's not good. Why is it hanging up? Oh, I know why, because it's... See, with that bezel off, that weird cup washer underneath here is pushing the face up. So I think once this is pushed down, it should work. Yeah, it'll be okay. Alright, I just gotta reinstall the bezel. There's rust staining on this metal ring. Some spots, you can see it. So I could clean that off and repaint this, but I figure I'll do that if I decide to get a new crystal for it. When I take the old crystal out, I'll clean this up and paint it, and then after the paint's dried, that would be the perfect time to put the new crystal in. Alright, so I just took this plastic knob off that covers this metal knob because it actually was interfering with getting this bezel back on. Seems like that's kind of weird that that doesn't quite have enough clearance. Alright, so I put this on and it wasn't turning very well. I tried loosening the screws and it still was really not turning well, so I took it apart and realized that the main reason was a couple of things. The rust on the inside here, so I took some fine sandpaper and got the high spots of rust off on the inside edge here. And then also I noticed that in the groove here there were a couple of spots like that right there. I don't know if that's going to show up on the video or not. There's a nick right there. So there's a couple of areas on this metal part right here where it looks like it had been damaged, probably by somebody installing this cover and not having it fully seated and trying to tighten those screws down. The screws, the little tiny set screws that go in this, they have points on them, and the points look like they may have dug into the metal in a couple of spots. Last thing I learned about this, which I hadn't noticed previously, was that on the inside here there is a very tiny little line or ridge. Right in here there's a little metal ridge that sticks up right there. It's a little key. And that, when you're installing this onto here, has to engage this little notch on the face. That's what locks this face to this, so that this will turn the face. And if you don't have that in the right place, this won't seat correctly. Turns out on the top side, directly opposite where that notch is, there is a notch visible through the crystal. Right about where my finger is, right there. So I can install this and make sure that that lines up correctly. Takes a little bit of finessing to do it. Still feels a little crunchy, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. So what I did on those little damaged areas, those little burrs, is I just used a pattern maker's file and cleaned those up. Well, I'm beginning to have my doubts about whether or not this bezel is supposed to be able to be rotated. I mean, it kind of makes sense because that notch on the face there keys this so that the face will turn with this. But I'll tell you, I have to loosen these screws up an awful lot before I can get it to turn. And when I go to turn it, it really hangs up badly. It really seems like those little screws are really grabbing in the groove. So I don't really like it. It's quite possible maybe this is not designed to be used with the face to adjust to 0. It could very well be because of the fact that it's such a high resolution indicator and that it's more geared towards use on like a comparator stand, that maybe the design is supposed to be that you would use the fine adjustment on the stand to 0 the indicator. So, but the great thing about it is now that it works perfectly. Now it works perfectly without rubbing anywhere. And now that I've installed this knob back on here, I was able to determine that this knob is actually a 0 set. So I think I'm right about this bezel not being designed to be spun around like other ones. Because if I turn this knob just now, nothing really happens, okay? But if I preload it as if I was taking a measurement and I turn the knob, kind of hard to do without making the whole thing move. Let me see if I can maybe hold it. So see that little bit of movement there? That's actually me moving this knob. If I had it on a stand, I could demonstrate it a lot better. But anyways, so pretty much in the home stretch now. Just going to put this back cover on. All right, so this is what's called a comparator stand, and as opposed to just a regular dial indicator stand, the comparator stand has an unusual design in the arm here. Tom Lipton did a video where he explained what this is called. I had some weird name like double flexion something, I don't know, way above my pay grade. But anyways, that's what makes this a little different. Instead of having just a rigid arm here, it's got this deal going on. So don't ask me, but I figured I'd use it on this just for the heck of it. So I've got a couple of Joe blocks in there right now, and you can see that it's actually at the 1. But now if I turn this knob, see, I can 0 it. So how cool is that? So that's 0'd right there. And then of course if I had a you know, a really small So that's the problem with this. It's so sensitive. It's kind of nuts, really. All right, so I guess we're going to call this a wrap. If you like the video, please hit the like button, and if you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. Take care.